Not since the sundering of the Liberty Bell has such a cacophonous crash deafened American ears as when the chirads of Chicago slipped the bonds of their COVID gulags and spilled out onto the streets to declare with one voice that they would not be denied their freedom. Freedom to skip school, that is. Vice magazine covers the chirads. These noble teens are doing what adults won't in the war against Omicron. They are walking out of their classes in protest at being forced to attend school during these dark days of COVID. Vice says of the chirads that they are, quote, a radical youth alliance of largely queer black and brown youth from a multitude of high schools and neighborhoods, end quote. And, quote, chirads operates according to non-hierarchical principles, end quote, and that, quote, the group is also serious about challenging existing power structures that, they told Motherboard, are prioritizing money over people's lives, end quote. What Vice does not say about the situation is who exactly is prioritizing money over people's lives. What profit motive is there exactly in a public school district? Vice also doesn't push back on or even explore the chirad claim that the education system, quote, has been going on for hundreds of years and nothing is getting better. We're still stuck in the same exact place, end quote. Perhaps Vice agrees with the chirads that the education system has been unchanged for black and brown students for the past 200 years. Who knows? They don't talk about it at all. But most of all, what Vice doesn't do in this article about students afraid of COVID and protesting a lack of COVID restrictions is to ask core questions like, how much of a threat is COVID to these students? Or, how many students have died of COVID in Chicago public schools? Vice leaves those questions not only unanswered, but completely unasked and unmentioned. It's not just Vice magazine writing about the troubles in the Chicago public schools. NPR has a story on the subject too. Every educator NPR spoke with described navigating an emotional storm as the Omicron variant continues to spread. They are trying to give kids continuity, warmth, and normalcy, while also watching out for signs of illness that can send students and teachers home abruptly. Teachers say they are reliving the scary days of the early pandemic and wondering what is going to happen next. We can feel the intensity, says Gonzalez in Florida. I don't want to say hysteria, because it's not hysteria, it's warranted. But you can feel the mounting pressure here again, that it's coming back. And, of course, that giant of journalism known as Teen Vogue is on the story as well. They're interviewing a student connected to the chirad group, Catlin Savato. Savato said, the fallout Chicago schools are seeing is just the latest example of school officials not listening to young people or considering their needs. I feel like adults are constantly leaving young people out of conversations, they said. I haven't sat through a whole school year since 6th grade. It's been really hard, especially as a freshman. It's brilliant insight there from Teen Vogue. Chicago's public schools have problems because they aren't taking enough advice from undereducated high school freshmen. We know the chirads are upset about how their schools are handling COVID. But what do they want specifically? Well, happily, they spell out their demands in a letter. Their demands are really pretty reasonable stuff, like Chicago public schools should fund supports outside of academia and not directly related to stopping the spread of COVID. Stuff like coat, food, and mutual aid projects, reloading EBT cards, fully funded transit cards for students, one full therapist for every 30 students, which would be about 11,000 full-time therapists for the district. Giving students access to high-speed Wi-Fi, personal tutors, fully funding all or any music and arts programs, funding student-centered organizing projects, hiring more staff to reduce class size, hiring staff so students have the option to be assigned someone to check in with, spaces of healing and community building, and a number of other demands, some of which I can't really make sense of. But hey, at least they're giving the CPS leadership 2 weeks, which they say is more than enough time for Chicago Public Schools leadership to implement these accommodations and address any outlying concerns. In another letter of demands, this one addressed to Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot, apart from demanding that she end her use of performative language, they say, as you consistently prove yourselves and your leadership to be incompetent, we as Black and brown young people are the common denominator of being the most harmed and impacted. We are tired, exhausted, and frustrated, and as a result, we will ongoingly and actively be acting upon the basis and soil of this letter, whether it be of service to our communities or in response to the failures of this institution. We will fight, we will build, and we will love in whichever forms we deem as necessary. Their letter to Lori Lightfoot actually touches on an interesting point, and it's one that I didn't see addressed at all in Vice, Teen Vogue, NPR, the Chicago Tribune, WBEZ, or any of the other media outlets that I've seen cover this story. The Chirads say, we as Black and brown young people are the most harmed and impacted. But is that true? Well, no, obviously it's not. Old people are the most harmed. But how much harm are the Chirads and their peers really suffering here? That's a question that none of our journalist friends even bothered to ask. They were too busy writing about the emotional storm, the panic, and the not quite hysteria to ever actually ask, well, what is the danger? How much danger is there? The Chicago Public Schools website shows the daily number of cases and the number of quarantined students, but they don't show the number of students who have died of COVID. Is that because it's too macabre to dwell on the dead students? The state of Illinois tracks COVID deaths by age for the entire state. They don't break deaths down by county. But we can see that Cook County, which contains Chicago and the Chicago Public School District, has about 20% of COVID tests and 20% of COVID cases. So it's reasonable to guess that Cook County has about 20% of COVID deaths too. How many people under 20 have died of COVID in the entire pandemic in Illinois? 31 in the whole state as of January 15. So we can guess that 20% of that number, 5 to 10, died in Cook County. If the number of deaths in Cook County versus the state is proportional to the number of cases and tests in Cook County versus the state. Remember, that's not just high school students in Chicago Public Schools, which the Chirads represent. That's approximately 10 deaths among everyone in Cook County under the age of 20. For comparison, in 2018, the latest year I could find this data for, the Illinois Department of Transportation says that there were 68 people under the age of 20 killed in car accidents. 56 were occupants of a car, plus another 12 non-occupant fatalities. 31 young people died of COVID in a year. 68 died from car accidents. Car accidents are more than twice as dangerous to young people as COVID is. So, do the Chirads have another chapter or group protesting being driven to school, or driving to school, or demanding that teens be barred from driving, or insisting on stricter traffic laws and lower speed limits? What's the deal? Driving is twice as dangerous to them and their cohort as COVID. I'm not trying to minimize the loss of life. Any child dying from any cause is a horrible, regrettable, awful thing. I have nothing but the utmost sympathy for families who've had to experience this unendurable loss. What I am trying to do, though, is put the risk from COVID into perspective in a way that the schools, the Chirads, and the media are clearly not trying to do. COVID is not some horrible danger for these kids. Again, car accidents kill more than twice as many children. What's more, your risk of dying from COVID is not like Russian roulette. If you are an overweight, immune-compromised asthmatic, maybe you should consider taking extra precautions. Maybe you should consider remote schooling and staying home. On the other hand, if you're a healthy, vaccinated young person, then the already extremely low risk posed by COVID to you becomes negligible. The media, teachers, and schools are driving kids to panic. When they panic, they create organizations that protest the schools, like the Chirads. The media writes these substance-free articles where they don't even bother to investigate statistics or figures or what the real dangers actually are. The media writes these articles about our brave student heroes valiantly resisting the bureaucrats who want them dead for profit. The media never actually bring up the fact that COVID poses a low danger to these children, because the media want to raise excitement and danger and attract an audience. And so this becomes part of a feedback loop. The media tells people COVID is dangerous to kids. Kids and parents freak out about the danger and start protesting and resisting. The media writes about their protests, and so on. And the loop continues, growing and feeding on itself. Teachers, you may have noticed that the Chicago Teachers Union features prominently in the Chirads writing, spread the fear too. Teachers and teachers' unions basically want to do less work for the same pay. They want to work remotely or go on strike. Teachers who do legitimately have more to worry about than their students try to instill in their students a fear of the disease as part of an effort to resist the administration, which is trying to force teachers to actually do their jobs. You may have some intuitive sympathy for these teachers. After all, they may be old enough that COVID is actually a substantial risk for them. However, COVID is so contagious that they are liable to get it regardless. If teachers don't catch COVID from their students, they will catch it at a bar, in a restaurant, at a movie theater, from their friends or from their family. The majority of people out there are, sadly enough, going to catch COVID, but there's no reason to stop educating children in the meanwhile. Finally, the schools themselves are doing their part to frighten students. This is pandemic theater. The schools want to assuage teachers and parents and pretend like they're actually doing something. So we get mask requirements, testing requirements, quarantine requirements, and every day the students experience what probably does seem to them as genuine risk. They think the disease is so dangerous that they must be masked and tested all the time and socially distanced at all times. And the reason they think this is because nobody has bothered to tell them that it's not true. The vast majority of them are at no real risk, and they could just skip all of the masking, social distancing, and testing. Maybe the Chirads are just kids who want to skip school and refill their EBT cards. Who could blame them? Probably some of them are in the effort because they want less school or more money, but I imagine others are genuinely, though wrongly, concerned about COVID. I think of a story I saw on Reddit about a school in the New York City public school district. The student who's writing this story describes a number of dysfunctional and dystopian scenes from their high school. The one that especially stuck with me was the students had been given COVID tests, and they were told to take them at home, but of course the students don't listen. Quote, 90% of the bathrooms were full of students swabbing their noses and taking their tests. I had one kid ask me with his mask down, by the way, whether a faint line was positive, proceeding to show me his positive COVID test. I told him to go to the nurse. One student tested positive in the auditorium, and a few students started screaming and ran away from him. There was now a lack of available seats, given there was a COVID-positive student within the middle of the auditorium. They are now planning on having teachers give up their free periods to act as substitute teachers because the auditorium is simply not safe enough. Stories like this make me wonder, what are we doing to young people by forcing them to take all of these precautions and forcing them to participate in this COVID theater? and persuading them to live in fear of something that is really not very dangerous to them at all. What are we doing to these kids? In fact, one of the things that the Chirads ask for is contact tracing. They want to know where infected students are at all times so that warnings could be given to other students. Hey, you're near an infected student. But of course, that would mean they would need to track not only the infected students, they'd need to track all of the other students as well, so that they would know who to warn, who has come into contact with an infected student. So imagine this, the young people are so afraid they're demanding their school track them at all hours of the day in order to prevent some nominal, negligible risk. I'm genuinely concerned that the pandemic theater has gone too far and may have serious, lasting repercussions for kids in a way that the virus really does not. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know by clicking the like button. If you'd like to see more content in a similar style, go ahead and subscribe. Thanks for your time.